There are decisions being made right now in rooms you will never sit in by people whose names you will never learn, and those decisions are about to reach into your 401k, whether you're paying attention or not. Maybe you've already felt it without knowing why. Maybe you checked your portfolio last week and something felt off. Some stock that everyone told you was the safe one suddenly wasn't acting safe anymore. Maybe you've noticed the news feels calmer than the charts do. That gap between what you're being told and what you're actually seeing is not an accident. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why it's happening, what one of the biggest banks on Wall Street just told its own clients behind closed doors, and what almost nobody watching this is prepared for. Here's something the market has always done in every cycle, going back decades, and most people never notice it because they're too busy watching the headline number. Markets don't move in a straight line. They lean on one engine, ride it as far as it'll go, and then, often without warning, they shift their weight to something else entirely, leaving the last engine stranded exactly when everyone piled the most money into it. That's not a conspiracy. It's just how capital behaves when it gets crowded into the same handful of ideas. Right now, that engine has a name, and it's been carrying almost the entire market on its back for nearly 2 years. You already know its name. What you probably don't know is that the people who actually move the size, the billions, not the thousands, have started quietly repositioning away from it, and they didn't wait for a headline to tell them it was time. This is the part that should get your attention. Morgan Stanley, one of the largest wealth managers on the planet, put out research this year telling its own clients something that breaks a rule Wall Street has quietly operated under for the better part of a decade. Don't assume the Federal Reserve is coming to save you this time. For years, the unspoken deal was simple. Stocks fall too far, the Fed steps in, everybody gets bailed out, rinse and repeat. Morgan Stanley's strategists are now saying that backstop can't be counted on the way it used to be, and that equities are heading into what they're calling a real test, not a gentle wobble. That's not a headline you saw scroll past on the news. That's a bank telling its wealthiest clients to recalibrate quietly while the rest of the market keeps assuming the old rules still apply. Here's the thing almost nobody gets right about moments like this. The danger was never picking the wrong stock. Plenty of people picked exactly the right stock over the last 2 years and still ended up worse off than if they'd done nothing because they had no idea when to get out. The actual risk, the one that quietly wrecks portfolios, is not knowing when the music changes. So in this video, we're going to walk through 3 specific pressures colliding at once that Morgan Stanley is flagging. Why the stocks everyone assumed were untouchable are suddenly looking fragile, which overlooked corners of the market tend to benefit when this kind of rotation happens. And finally, the discipline that separates people who protect their gains from people who watch them evaporate. Picture a basketball team with exactly one player who can score. For a while, that's fine. He's brilliant. He's carrying the offense. The team keeps winning. But every opposing coach in the league eventually figures out the game plan, shut down the one scorer, and the whole team stalls. That's basically been the structure of this market. A small handful of massive technology companies riding an enormous wave of AI spending have been responsible for the overwhelming share of the market's gains. Morgan Stanley's own research has pointed out that combined spending commitments from just the largest tech players have exploded far beyond what anyone projected a year ago, climbing into the hundreds of billions and heading toward over $1 trillion in the next year alone. That's an incredible amount of capital chasing one idea. And when that much money concentrates in one place, the market stops behaving like a diversified system and starts behaving like that one-man team. Underneath the surface, something Wall Street calls breadth, meaning how many stocks are actually participating in the rally, has been quietly weakening even while the headline index looks fine. Fewer and fewer stocks are doing the work of holding the whole market up. Why does this matter to you? Because if you're holding a portfolio that looks diversified on paper but is secretly leaning on the same 3 or 4 names everyone else owns, you're not actually diversified, you're concentrated, and concentrated is exactly the kind of position that gets punished hardest when the engine finally sputters. But the AI trade isn't the only pressure building underneath this market. There are 3 specific dominoes lining up, and Morgan Stanley is watching all 3. Think of dominoes standing in a row, each one leaning slightly against the next, completely stable until the first one tips. The first domino is energy. Ongoing geopolitical tension, particularly the instability tied to Iran, has kept oil prices and supply disruptions front and center for Morgan Stanley's economists this year. When oil gets more expensive and less predictable, it doesn't just hit gas prices. It works its way through shipping costs, manufacturing costs, and ultimately inflation numbers that the Fed watches closely. The second domino is the Fed itself. Under new leadership at the central bank, the easing bias that markets got comfortable with over the last several years has clearly shifted, and Morgan Stanley's strategists are explicit that investors should stop assuming or emergency support are guaranteed the moment volatility spikes. The third domino is the labor market and consumer spending, the quiet engine that's been propping up growth even as headlines focus on tech and AI. If energy costs stay elevated while the Fed holds firm and consumer resilience starts to crack, you get 3 dominoes leaning on each other at the same time, and it only takes one firm push to send the whole row down. Here's why this actually matters to you and not just to economists on a research desk. Most people only react after the first domino has already fallen, when the damage is visible in their statement balance. Understanding that these 3 pressures are already lined up right now before the headlines catch up is the difference between reacting and preparing. But dominoes falling don't destroy value, they just move it somewhere else, and that's where this gets interesting. Imagine a spring being pushed down slowly, quietly, while everyone's attention is somewhere else. That's what's happening right now to a group of enormous, well-known companies that the market has quietly deprioritized while chasing the AI story. These aren't struggling businesses. Many of them are some of the most profitable companies in the country, sitting outside the handful of names everyone's obsessed with, trading at valuations that look almost forgotten by comparison. Morgan Stanley's own strategists have talked openly about a coming rotation, a shift beyond the small group of megacap tech names into sectors and companies the market has left behind. Once there's more concrete proof that all this AI spending is actually translating into profit rather than just promise. That's the coiled spring. When capital gets tired of paying an enormous premium for the same handful of stories, it doesn't disappear. It goes looking for value it can still find cheap, and that money has to land somewhere. Why should you care about a rotation that hasn't fully happened yet? Because rotations like this reward the people who position early and quietly punish the people who only show up after the move is already obvious on a chart, when the cheap prices are gone and everyone else is chasing the same trade you could have gotten ahead of. But megacap tech and forgotten blue chips aren't the whole story either. There are entire sectors sitting almost completely outside the spotlight right now. There are always neighborhoods in the market that nobody's talking about at the dinner party, and those are usually the ones worth a second look. Right now, that includes areas tied to real physical assets, things like infrastructure, energy production, and materials, sectors Morgan Stanley has specifically pointed to as worth building exposure toward given how fragmented the global economy has become and how much leverage countries with real resources are gaining. It also includes parts of the consumer economy that have quietly diverged, some struggling under pressure, while others hold up in ways the market hasn't fully priced in yet, part of what strategists have started describing as an increasingly divided, uneven economy. And it includes select corners of biotechnology and smaller innovative companies that have their own catalysts entirely disconnected from the AI megacap story, moving on their own news, their own breakthroughs, their own timelines. None of these are guaranteed winners, and nobody serious is telling you to bet the farm on any single one of them. The point is that while the entire financial media conversation stays locked on the same 5 or 6 tech tickers, Real strategists at real institutions are quietly building maps of where value might travel next. Why does this matter to you? Because by the time these sectors show up in a headline as the hot new trade, most of the easy value will already be gone, captured by the people who were paying attention months earlier. Understanding where the money might rotate to means nothing, though if you don't have a plan for how and when to actually act on it, and that's the piece almost nobody talks about. Professional investors, the ones who actually survive multiple market cycles instead of getting wiped out by one, share a habit that almost no retail investor practices. They decide how and when they're leaving a position before they ever enter it, not after it's already dropped 15% and panic sets in, not after a headlines scares them into a decision they haven't thought through before. They set the terms in advance when their head is clear and their money isn't on the line yet, precisely because they know that once a position is red and stress is high, the brain makes worse decisions than it does in a calm moment with no emotional stakes attached. That single habit, deciding your exit before your entry, is worth more than knowing which sector rotates next, because even the best information in the world is useless in the hands of someone who freezes or panics at the moment it actually matters. This is the discipline Morgan Stanley's own warning is really pointing toward underneath all the technical language about breadth and rotation and Fed policy. It's not really a stock picking problem. It's a behavior problem. So let's bring this all the way back around. Understanding that this market has been leaning on one engine means nothing without knowing how to spot when that engine starts to sputter. Understanding the three dominoes lining up around energy, the Fed and the consumer, means nothing without watching which one tips first. Understanding that a rotation into forgotten giants and overlooked sectors is quietly building means nothing if you're not positioned before it becomes obvious to everyone else. And understanding all of it means absolutely nothing without the discipline to decide your exit before emotion ever gets a vote. That's really the split this video has been circling the entire time. Are investors who wait for certainty, who need someone to ring a bell before they'll believe anything's changed, and there are investors who learn to read the quiet signals before the loud ones arrive. Morgan Stanley just told its own clients which kind of environment we're entering. The only question left is which kind of investor you're going to choose to be.